Billionaire went to the hospital for a routine check and ran into his ex-fiancée with a newborn baby. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The pristine marble floors of Westfield Private Medical Center gleamed under the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Beckett Valiant adjusted his charcoal Tom Ford suit jacket as he strode through the main lobby, his Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished stone. At 36, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built a pharmaceutical empire from nothing, transforming a small family business into a billion-dollar corporation that supplied medications across 3 continents. His quarterly medical examination was as routine as his morning espresso or his evening review of market reports. Every 3 months, same day, same time, same floor. The 23rd floor had been reserved exclusively for the Valiant family for over a decade, a privilege that came with being one of the hospital's largest benefactors. Beckett approached the reception desk, his steel blue eyes scanning his phone as he reviewed the afternoon's schedule. A merger with a German pharmaceutical company needed his attention, and 3 board meetings were lined up for the following week. Control was everything in his world, every detail planned, every outcome calculated. "Good afternoon, Mr. Valiant," the young receptionist said with a nervous smile. She was new, probably fresh out of college, with auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun and hands that trembled slightly as she checked his appointment. "Dr. Harrison is running a few minutes behind. If you could take the elevator to the 15th floor, he'll meet you there shortly." Beckett's brow furrowed slightly. "The 15th floor? I always go to the 23rd. "Oh, there was a scheduling mix-up, sir. The 23rd floor is under maintenance today. Dr. Harrison specifically requested the 15th floor for your examination." Her voice carried the uncertainty of someone still learning the ropes. Without further question, Beckett nodded curtly. Time was money, and arguing with a receptionist wouldn't change whatever bureaucratic confusion had occurred. He strode toward the elevator bank, his mind already shifting to the conference call he needed to make after the appointment. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime and he stepped inside, pressing the button for the 15th floor. As the numbers climbed, he loosened his navy silk tie slightly, a rare concession to comfort. The past 7 months had been a whirlwind of expansion and success, yet something felt hollow about each achievement. 7 months. That's how long it had been since Violette had walked out of his life without explanation, leaving behind only an empty penthouse apartment and the engagement ring on his nightstand. No note, no goodbye, no forwarding address. Just silence where her laughter used to fill the rooms. The elevator stopped with a gentle jolt, and the doors slid open to reveal a corridor he'd never seen before. The walls were painted in soft pastels, pale yellow and mint green, with cheerful murals of cartoon animals dancing along the baseboards. This wasn't the sterile, professional environment of the executive medical floor he was accustomed to. A small placard near the elevator read, "Pediatric Wing, Neonatal Intensive Care Unit." Beckett stepped out, confusion evident in his expression. This was definitely not where he was supposed to be. He pulled out his phone to call the reception desk, but before he could dial, a sound stopped him cold. A baby's cry, soft, fragile, and heartbreaking in its vulnerability. The sound seemed to echo through the quiet corridor, coming from somewhere around the corner. There was something about that particular cry that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. He walked toward the sound, his expensive shoes now silent on the carpeted floor. As he rounded the corner, he saw a small waiting area with comfortable chairs arranged around a low table covered with children's books and toys. And there, sitting in one of the chairs with her back partially turned to him, was a woman holding a tiny bundle against her chest. Her long, honey-blonde hair fell in gentle waves over her shoulders, just as he remembered. She wore a simple cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, and she was gently rocking the baby, whispering something too soft for him to hear. His heart stopped. "Violette?" The woman's entire body went rigid. Slowly, she turned to face him, and Beckett found himself staring into the emerald green eyes that had haunted his dreams for 7 months. Violette Leroux looked exactly as he remembered, yet completely different. Her face was thinner, more mature, with new lines of worry around her eyes. But she was still breathtakingly beautiful, still the woman who had once made him believe that love could conquer anything. "Beckett." Her voice was barely above a whisper. and she instinctively pulled the baby closer to her chest. "What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing." His voice came out rougher than intended, the shock evident in every syllable. His eyes moved from her face to the small bundle in her arms. "Is that—" "Her name is Celeste," Violette said quietly, answering the question he couldn't finish asking. "She's 3 weeks old." The math hit him like a physical blow. 3 weeks old. 7 months since Violette had left. Which meant, she's mine. It wasn't a question. Violette's eyes filled with tears, but she lifted her chin with the same defiance he remembered from their arguments about the future. "She's mine, Beckett. I've raised her alone for 3 weeks. But she's my daughter too." The words felt foreign in his mouth, surreal. Beckett Valiant, who had spent his entire adult life avoiding commitment to anything beyond his business, was a father. "You made it very clear that fatherhood wasn't in your plans," Violette said, her voice gaining strength. "You said you could be my partner, but never a father. So I made the choice to free you from that burden. You didn't tell me you were pregnant." His voice rose slightly, causing the baby, Celeste, to stir in her arms. "I didn't know," Violette admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I found out 2 weeks after I left. I was already gone, already committed to starting over. And after everything you said about never wanting children." She trailed off, but the accusation in her eyes was clear. He had driven her away with his stubborn refusal to consider a future that included family. Beckett stared at the baby in her arms, his daughter, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The tiny face was peaceful now, small pink lips slightly parted as she dozed. She had Violette's nose but his dark hair, and even in sleep there was something about her expression that reminded him of his own baby pictures. "Why are you here? At the hospital?" he asked, forcing himself to focus on the immediate concern. "Celeste was born premature. She's been having some respiratory issues, and we're here for a follow-up with the pediatric pulmonologist." Violette's voice softened when she spoke about the baby, revealing a tenderness that made Beckett's heart ache. Is she going to be okay?" "She will be. She's strong." Violette looked down at Celeste with such pure love that Beckett felt like an intruder witnessing something sacred. They sat in silence for several long moments, the weight of 7 months of separation and the revelation of his unexpected fatherhood settling between them like a wall of unspoken words. Finally Beckett spoke, his voice barely audible. Can I see her? Properly?" Violette hesitated for a moment, then carefully adjusted the baby in her arms so that Beckett could see Celeste's face more clearly. The little girl was perfect, tiny and delicate, with long eyelashes resting against round cheeks. "She has your stubborn chin," Violette said with a sad smile. Beckett reached out tentatively, then stopped, his hand hovering in the air. "May I?" Violette nodded, and he gently touched Celeste's tiny hand with one finger. Immediately the baby's fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. The simple contact sent a jolt through his entire being. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion he didn't know how to process. "She's everything I never knew I needed," Violette said, watching his face carefully. The weight of that statement hung in the air between them. Everything she never knew she needed, while he had convinced himself he never needed anything beyond his empire and his control. What choices would love demand from both of them now that their daughter had unknowingly brought them face to face with the future they had both run from? The sound of approaching footsteps broke the fragile moment between them. A nurse in cheerful scrubs decorated with tiny elephants rounded the corner, clipboard in hand. "Ms. LaRue, Doctor, Brennan is ready to see Celeste now," the nurse announced with a warm smile, then noticed Beckett's imposing presence. Her expression shifted to polite curiosity as she took in his expensive suit and the unmistakable aura of wealth and authority he carried. "Thank you," Violette replied, carefully gathering the diaper bag at her feet while keeping Celeste secure in her arms. She avoided making eye contact with Beckett as she stood, but he could see the slight tremor in her hands. "I'll come with you," Beckett said, the words leaving his mouth before he had consciously decided to speak them. Violette froze mid-step. "Beckett, you don't need to. She's my daughter too." His voice was quiet, but carried the steel undertone that had closed countless business deals. "I want to know what's wrong with her." The nurse looked between them, clearly sensing the tension but maintaining her professional demeanor. "Are you the father, sir?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Beckett's jaw tightened as he realized he had no legal claim to the child he'd just learned existed. No rights, no documentation, No proof beyond the genetic connection he could feel in his bones. Yes, he said firmly, his eyes locked on Violette's face. I am. Violette's shoulders sagged slightly, and for a moment she looked impossibly tired. It's complicated, she told the nurse. But yes, he's her father. The nurse nodded understandingly. Family dynamics can be complex. Dr. Brennan is very accommodating. Please, follow me. As they walked down the corridor, Beckett found himself studying Violette's profile. She moved with the practiced efficiency of a mother who had learned to navigate the world one-handed while carrying a baby. Her honey blonde hair was shorter than he remembered, ending just below her shoulders instead of cascading down her back. There were small details that spoke of the life she'd built without him. A simple gold chain around her neck that he didn't recognize, practical flats instead of the designer heels she used to favor, and a confidence in her motherhood that both impressed and wounded him. How long have you been living here? In the city? He asked quietly as they walked. I never left, Violette admitted, her voice barely audible. I moved to Brooklyn Heights, found a small apartment above a bookstore. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. For 7 months he had assumed she had fled across the country, maybe even internationally. He had hired 3 different private investigators to find her, all of whom had come up empty. Yet she had been less than an hour away from their old penthouse in Manhattan, raising his daughter alone while he attended board meetings and closed million-dollar deals. Brooklyn Heights, he repeated, his mind racing. You were here the entire time. I needed to disappear, not relocate to another continent, she said, finally glancing at him. Besides, this is where my life was. My work, my friends. I just needed space from our life together. They reached the examination room and the nurse gestured for them to enter. Dr. Brennan, a kind-faced woman in her 50s with graying hair and gentle eyes, greeted them warmly. Ms. LaRue, good to see you again. And Celeste looks wonderful today, she said, then noticed Beckett. I don't believe we've met. This is Beckett, Celeste's father, Violette said quietly, settling into the chair beside the examination table. Dr. Brennan's eyebrows rose slightly. Clearly, this was the first time Beckett had appeared at any of Celeste's appointments, but she maintained her professional composure. Of course, I'm Dr. Brennan, Celeste's pediatric pulmonologist. I've been following her case since birth. What exactly is wrong with her? Beckett asked, his business mindset automatically shifting into crisis management mode. What are her treatment options? What specialists have you consulted? What's the prognosis? Dr. Brennan exchanged a glance with Violette, who gave a small nod of permission. Celeste was born at 34 weeks with underdeveloped lungs. It's not uncommon in premature births, but it requires careful monitoring. The good news is that she's been responding beautifully to treatment. As the doctor began examining Celeste, Beckett found himself studying every detail of the interaction. The way Violette instinctively knew how to soothe Celeste when she fussed during the examination, the practiced ease with which she answered questions about feeding schedules and sleep patterns, the obvious bond between mother and daughter that had developed over 3 weeks of shared life. He had missed all of it. The pregnancy, the birth, the sleepless nights, the first smile, the first laugh, a lifetime of moments that belonged to his daughter, and he had been completely absent. Her lung function has improved dramatically, Dr. Brennan continued, listening to Celeste's chest with her stethoscope. I'm very pleased with her progress. We can extend the time between appointments to every 6 weeks instead of every 3. That's wonderful news, Violette said, relief evident in her voice. She looked at Beckett, seeming to remember his presence. She was on oxygen for the first 3 weeks. I barely slept, monitoring her breathing every night. The image of Violette sitting alone in some small apartment, watching their premature daughter struggle to breathe while he attended charity galas and business dinners, made his chest tighten with guilt and anger, mostly at himself. After the examination concluded and they had scheduled the next appointment, they found themselves back in the corridor, the weight of unspoken questions heavy between them. I need to ask you something, Beckett said, his voice careful and controlled, and I need you to be honest with me. Violette shifted Celeste to her other arm, the movement defensive. What? Why didn't you tell me? Even after you found out you were pregnant, why didn't you reach out? Violette was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on Celeste's face rather than his. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but tinged with old pain. Do you remember our last conversation, Beckett? Really remember it? He did. Every word was burned into his memory, replayed during countless sleepless nights over the past 7 months. They had been sitting in their favorite restaurant, Enzo's, and she had brought up marriage timelines and children for the third time that week. "I remember," he said quietly. "You didn't just say you weren't ready to be a father. You said you would never be ready, that children would destroy everything you had worked to build, that the kind of life you wanted wasn't compatible with being a parent." Her voice remained calm, but he could see the hurt still lingering in her eyes. "You said that if I couldn't accept that, then maybe we weren't as compatible as we thought." The words hit him like a physical blow because they were true. He had said those things, driven by fear and stubbornness, and a desperate need to maintain control over his perfectly ordered life. So when I found out I was carrying your child," Violette continued, her voice gaining strength, "I had two choices. I could tell you and watch you resent both of us for ruining your perfect life, or I could give you the freedom you so clearly wanted and raise her myself." Beckett felt the words like physical blows, each one a reminder of his own stubborn blindness. He had been so certain that his life was exactly as it should be, controlled, predictable, profitable. The idea of a child disrupting that carefully constructed world had terrified him in ways he hadn't even admitted to himself. "You should have told me," he said, though the conviction in his voice wavered. "Regardless of what I said before, you should have given me the choice." "Should I have?" Violette's eyes flashed with a spark of the fire he remembered from their relationship. "Should I have called you and said, 'Remember how you said children would destroy your life? Well, surprise, you're going to be a father.' Should I have subjected our daughter to a father who saw her as an obligation?" The truth in her words stung, but Beckett pressed on. "You don't know how I would have reacted. You made that decision for both of us." "I made that decision for her," Violette said firmly, adjusting Celeste in her arms as the baby began to stir. "I wasn't going to bring a child into the world knowing her father saw her as a burden." They had reached the elevator and the tension between them was palpable. Other visitors to the hospital gave them a wide berth, sensing the emotional undercurrent of their conversation. "Where are you parked?" Beckett asked, pressing the button for the elevator. "I took the subway," Violette replied. "I don't drive much in the city anymore." The thought of her navigating the subway system with a 6-month-old baby and all the accompanying gear made something protective flare in his chest. "Let me drive you home." "That's not necessary." "Violette." He turned to face her fully, and she was struck by the intensity in his steel blue eyes. "I've missed 6 months of my daughter's life. Please don't make me miss the opportunity to at least make sure you both get home safely." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but just a ride home. That's all." The elevator ride to the parking garage was silent, except for the soft sounds Celeste made as she began to wake up. Beckett found himself hyper-aware of every little noise his daughter made, every movement in Violette's arms. When Celeste let out a small whimper, he had to resist the urge to reach out and touch her face. His Bentley Continental was parked in the VIP section of the garage, its black paint gleaming under the fluorescent lights. As they approached, Violette stopped short. "Beckett, I don't have a car seat." The simple statement highlighted just how unprepared he was for this new reality. In his world of corporate jets and luxury vehicles, the practical needs of a 6-month-old had never been a consideration. "We'll get one," he said, already pulling out his phone. "There's a baby store 3 blocks from here. They'll have what we need." 20 minutes later, they were standing in baby paradise, surrounded by an overwhelming array of car seats, strollers, and infant accessories. Beckett felt completely out of his element, but Violette moved through the store with practiced efficiency. "This one," she said, pointing to a top-of-the-line infant car seat. "It's the same model we have at home, so she'll be comfortable." As the store associate rang up the purchase, along with a base unit for installation, Beckett found himself studying Violette and Celeste. The baby was now fully awake, her dark eyes wide and alert as she took in her surroundings. When her gaze landed on Beckett, she stared at him with the intense focus that only babies possessed, as if she were trying to figure out exactly who this tall stranger was. "She's very observant," the store associate commented with a smile. "How old is she?" 6 months, Violette replied. "Oh, she's right at that age where she's starting to really notice people. Does she have stranger anxiety yet?" Violette glanced at Beckett, a flicker of something, sadness, regret, crossing her features. "She doesn't really have experience with strangers. It's mostly just been the two of us." The simple statement carried so much weight. For 3 weeks, Violette had been Celeste's entire world. Mother, father, protector, provider. No family support. No partner to share the sleepless nights or celebrate the milestones. Just a young mother and her baby, making their way through the world together. Back in the parking garage, Beckett watched as the installation technician secured the car seat in his Bentley. The sight of baby equipment in his pristine vehicle should have felt foreign, intrusive. Instead, it felt like something he hadn't realized was missing. She might cry, Violette warned as she carefully buckled Celeste into the seat. She's not used to car rides, especially with strangers in the car. But Celeste didn't cry. She looked around the luxurious interior with curious eyes, her small hands reaching toward the soft leather and polished wood trim. When her gaze found Beckett in the rearview mirror, she made a small cooing sound that went straight to his heart. She seems comfortable, he observed, starting the engine. She's always been adaptable, Violette said softly. She had to be. As they drove through the city toward Brooklyn Heights, Beckett found himself taking a longer route than necessary, reluctant to end this unexpected time with his daughter. He peppered Violette with questions about Celeste's routine, her preferences, her development milestones. Does she sleep through the night? Mostly. She still wakes up once around 3 for a feeding. What's her favorite toy? A stuffed elephant named Peanut. She won't sleep without it. Has she said any words yet? She babbles a lot. Sometimes it sounds like mama, but Dr. Brennan says real words won't come for another few months. Each answer painted a picture of a life he had been excluded from, moments and memories that belonged to Violette and Celeste alone. The guilt was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, a fierce longing to be part of that world, to know his daughter the way her mother did. They turned onto Violette Street, a charming tree-lined avenue with historic brownstones and small neighborhood businesses. It was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names and children played on the sidewalks. Nothing like the sterile luxury of his Manhattan penthouse. It's that building, Violette said, pointing to a modest 3-story structure with a colorful bookstore on the ground floor. Aunt Agatha's books. Mrs. Henderson, the owner, lets me rent the apartment upstairs. Beckett parked and got out to help with Celeste and the diaper bag. As Violette lifted their daughter from the car seat, he caught a glimpse of the apartment building's entrance. A narrow staircase leading to a door marked 2A. 2 flights up with a baby and all her things? He asked, frowning. I'm stronger than I look, Violette replied with a small smile. And Mrs. Henderson helps when she can. The thought of Violette climbing those stairs multiple times a day, carrying Celeste and groceries and everything else a baby required, while he had been living in a penthouse with an elevator and a doorman, made his chest tight with guilt and frustration. Violette, he said as she adjusted the diaper bag on her shoulder, Can I see where you live? Where she lives? She hesitated, clearly torn. Beckett, I don't think that's a good idea. This is complicated enough already. Please, he said quietly. I need to understand the life you've built. The life I wasn't part of. After a long moment, she nodded. Okay, but just for a few minutes. The apartment was small but warm, and filled with natural light from large windows facing the street. It was nothing like the sprawling penthouse they had once shared, but it felt like a home in ways his sterile luxury never had. Baby toys were scattered across a colorful playmat in the living room, and photos of Celeste at various stages covered the refrigerator and walls. Beckett stood in the center of the main room, taking in every detail. This was where his daughter had taken her first bath, where she had learned to smile, where she would eventually learn to crawl and walk, and say her first words. This small, modest apartment held all the memories he had missed. It's perfect, he said quietly, and meant it. Violette looked surprised by his response. It's tiny, and the heat doesn't work very well in winter, and sometimes the bookstore downstairs has events that run late. It's a home, he interrupted. It's warm and safe and filled with love. That's more than a lot of children have. They stood in silence for a moment, Celeste content in her mother's arms, looking around the familiar space with bright, alert eyes. I want to be part of this, Beckett said suddenly, the words rushing out before he could stop them. I want to be part of her life, part of both your lives. Violette's expression grew guarded. Beckett, I know I have no right to ask. I know I gave up any claim to that when I said those things 7 months ago. But she's my daughter and I've already missed so much. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. It's not that simple, Violette said quietly. You can't just decide you want to be a father now that she's convenient and cute. Being a parent means being there at 3 in the morning when she's crying and you don't know why. It means putting her needs before your business deals and your social obligations. It means your life isn't your own anymore. I know that. Do you? Violette's eyes searched his face. Because 7 months ago, You said that kind of life would destroy everything you'd worked for. Beckett was quiet for a long moment, the weight of his past words and current longing warring within him. Maybe, he said finally, what I worked for wasn't worth preserving if it meant losing this. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest, and terrifying in its implications. Violette stared at him for a long moment, her emerald eyes searching his face for any sign of the man who had once dismissed the idea of fatherhood so completely. Celeste chose that moment to reach out toward Beckett, her tiny fingers opening and closing in the universal baby gesture for pick-me-up. She wants you to hold her, Violette said quietly, surprise evident in her voice. Beckett's hands trembled slightly as he reached out. I don't know how. Support her head and neck, Violette instructed, carefully transferring Celeste into his arms. She's stronger now than she was as a newborn, but still be gentle. The moment Celeste settled against his chest, something fundamental shifted in Beckett's world. She was so small, so warm, so utterly dependent. Her dark hair, his hair, was soft against his cheek, and she smelled like baby powder and something else he couldn't identify, but knew he would never forget. Hello, little one, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I'm sorry it took me so long to meet you. Celeste looked up at him with wide, serious eyes, as if she were studying his face and committing it to memory. Then, without warning, she smiled, a bright, toothless grin that transformed her entire face and sent a jolt of pure joy through Beckett's chest. She likes you, Violette observed, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Wonder, maybe, or hope. She's incredible, Beckett breathed, unable to look away from his daughter's face. She's absolutely perfect. For several minutes, they stood in comfortable silence while Celeste contentedly explored Beckett's face with her tiny hands, patting his cheek and grasping at his tie. It was the most peaceful moment he'd experienced in months. The spell was broken by a gentle knock on the apartment door. That'll be Mrs. Henderson, Violette said, moving to answer it. She always checks on us around dinner time. The woman who entered was in her 70s with silver hair pinned up in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a cardigan covered in cat hair and carried a plate covered with a checkered dish towel. I made extra lasagna again, she said warmly, then stopped short when she noticed Beckett holding Celeste. Oh, I didn't realize you had company. Mrs. Henderson, this is Beckett, Violette said carefully. Celeste's father. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose to her hairline. In the 7 months since Violette had moved in, she had never mentioned Celeste's father beyond saying he wasn't in the picture. The older woman took in Beckett's expensive suit and the gentle way he was holding the baby. Well, she said finally, setting the lasagna on the small kitchen counter. It's about time you showed up. Beckett winced at the mild rebuke, but Mrs. Henderson wasn't finished. Do you have any idea what this girl has been through? Pregnant and alone, working double shifts at the clinic until she couldn't anymore, then bringing home a premature baby and sitting up all night making sure she was breathing. Mrs. Henderson, Violette began, embarrassed. No, dear, he needs to hear this. The older woman's voice was firm, but not unkind. I've watched her struggle to pay for formula and diapers while you were off doing whatever it is wealthy men do. She's never complained, not once, but I have eyes. Beckett felt each word like a physical blow. While he had been attending board meetings and closing deals, Violette had been working double shifts to support their daughter. While he had been sleeping in his king-sized bed in his climate-controlled penthouse, she had been staying awake all night, monitoring their premature baby's breathing. You're right, he said quietly, his arms instinctively tightening around Celeste. I should have been here, I should have known. Mrs. Henderson studied his face for a moment, then nodded curtly. Well, you're here now. That's what matters. But if you hurt them again, you'll answer to me. Despite everything, Beckett found himself fighting back a smile. This 70-something bookstore owner was threatening him, and somehow it felt exactly right. Violette and Celeste deserved people who would protect them. I understand, he said seriously. And I give you my word, I won't hurt them again. After Mrs. Henderson left, the apartment felt smaller and more intimate. Celeste had fallen asleep in Beckett's arms, her tiny hand fisted in his shirt. He was afraid to move, unwilling to disturb her peaceful slumber. You can sit down, Violette said softly, gesturing toward the small couch. She's a heavy sleeper once she's out. Beckett carefully settled onto the couch, adjusting his position to keep Celeste comfortable. Violette sat beside him, close enough that he could smell her familiar perfume, jasmine and vanilla, the same scent that used to linger on his pillows. "Tell me about her," he said quietly. "Tell me everything I missed." Violette was quiet for a moment, then began to speak in a soft voice that wouldn't wake the baby. She was born at 2:30 in the morning on March 15th, 4 pounds, 12 ounces. The doctors were worried because her lungs weren't fully developed, so she went straight to the NICU. Violette's voice caught slightly. "I couldn't hold her for 3 days. She was so small and there were so many wires and tubes." Beckett's chest tightened, imagining Violette sitting beside an incubator, unable to comfort her newborn daughter. "Were you alone? During the birth?" "Mrs. Henderson came with me. She's the one who drove me to the hospital when my water broke at 4 in the morning." Violette smiled slightly. "She yelled at the nurses until they found me a private room." "I should have been there," Beckett said, his voice rough with regret. "I thought about calling you," Violette admitted. "When the doctor said she might not make it through the first night, I thought about calling. But then I remembered what you said about children destroying lives, and I couldn't bring myself to do it." "She almost didn't make it?" The thought of losing Celeste before he'd even known she existed was unbearable. The first few weeks were touch and go. She couldn't regulate her body temperature, and her breathing was irregular. "I moved into the hospital, sleeping in the chair beside her incubator." Violette reached out and gently touched Celeste's hand. "But she's a fighter. Every day she got a little bit stronger." Beckett looked down at the healthy baby sleeping peacefully in his arms and marveled at her resilience. She had overcome so much in her short life, and he had been completely unaware of her struggle. "What about work? How did you manage financially?" Violette's cheeks flushed slightly. "I worked at a free clinic in Queens until I couldn't anymore. After Celeste was born, I picked up freelance medical transcription work so I could stay home with her. It doesn't pay much, but it's enough for our basic needs." The picture she painted was one of quiet struggle and sacrifice, a young mother doing whatever it took to provide for her child. Meanwhile, he had been living in luxury, completely oblivious to their existence. "Violette," he said carefully, "I want to help. Financially, I mean. You shouldn't have to worry about money when I can—" "No." Her response was immediate and firm. "I don't want your money, Beckett. She's my daughter, too. It's my responsibility to provide for her. Throwing money at the situation won't erase the fact that you weren't here when we needed you most," Violette said, her voice gaining an edge. "I don't want her to grow up thinking that's how love works, that you can buy your way out of abandonment." Her words stung, but he knew they were fair. "Then what can I do? How can I prove that I want to be part of her life?" Violette was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "You can start by showing up," she said finally. "Not just when it's convenient or when you feel guilty. Being a parent means showing up every day, even when it's hard or boring or inconvenient." "I can do that." "Can you?" Violette's green eyes searched his face. "Can you really? Because your life hasn't changed, Beckett. You still have the same job, the same responsibilities, the same priorities. What happens when there's a crisis at work and Celeste needs you? What happens when she's sick and you have an important meeting? What happens when being her father conflicts with being Beckett Valiant, pharmaceutical empire builder?" The questions hung in the air between them, each one a challenge to his commitment. He wanted to give her the easy answer, to promise that nothing would ever come before Celeste. But they both knew his track record, and empty promises would only make things worse. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I can't promise that I'll be perfect or that I'll never make mistakes, but I can promise that I'll try. Every day, I'll try to be the father she deserves." Violette studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because her expression softened slightly. "She deserves better than just trying, Beckett. She deserves a father who puts her first. Always." "Then teach me how," he said quietly. "I know I have no right to ask, but teach me how to be what she needs." The vulnerability in his voice seemed to surprise her. This was not the confident, controlling man she had known. This was someone stripped down to his core, asking for help with the most important job of his life. "It starts with showing up," she said softly. "Tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that, even when it's hard." Celeste stirred in his arms, making soft baby sounds as she shifted position. Without thinking, Beckett began to gently rock her and she settled back into peaceful sleep. "She trusts you already," Violette observed, wonder in her voice. Looking down at his daughter's peaceful face, Beckett felt something click into place in his chest. For 36 years he had built his life around control, power, and financial success. But sitting in this small apartment, holding this tiny person who shared his DNA and his stubborn chin, He realized that everything he thought he wanted paled in comparison to what he was holding in his arms. The question was whether he would be strong enough to build his life around her, instead of asking her to fit into the life he had already built. 3 days later, Beckett stood outside Violette's apartment building at exactly 7 in the morning, holding 2 coffee cups and a bag of fresh pastries from the French bakery downtown. He had canceled his morning workout and rescheduled 2 conference calls to be here, and the small act of rebellion against his rigid schedule felt both terrifying and liberating. He knocked softly on the apartment door, mindful that Celeste might still be sleeping. The sound of footsteps approached, followed by the quiet click of locks being undone. Violette opened the door wearing an oversized sweater and leggings, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and the pale complexion of someone who hadn't slept well. Beckett? She glanced at the clock on her phone, confusion evident. It's 7 in the morning. You said showing up meant every day, he said, offering her one of the coffee cups. I brought breakfast. She stared at him for a moment as if trying to determine whether this was real or if exhaustion was making her hallucinate. Then she noticed the familiar logo on the coffee cup, her favorite cafe from their old neighborhood, the one that made her preferred oat milk latte with an extra shot and a dash of cinnamon. You remember my coffee order, she said softly, accepting the warm cup. I remember everything about you, he replied, then cleared his throat. Is Celeste awake? She had a rough night, didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time. Violette stepped aside to let him in. She's finally down now, but she'll probably wake up soon. The apartment was dimmer than it had been 3 days ago, with thick curtains drawn against the morning light. Baby bottles sat in various stages of preparation on the kitchen counter, and a pile of tiny clothes waited to be folded on the couch. Rough night how? Beckett asked, setting the pastries on the counter and taking in the evidence of a difficult evening. Colic, maybe, or an ear infection starting. She was fussy and wouldn't eat properly. Violette sank onto the couch, cradling her coffee like a lifeline. I called the pediatric nurse line twice, but they said to monitor her and call back if she developed a fever. Beckett felt a stab of guilt and helplessness. While he had been sleeping peacefully in his king-sized bed, Violette had been here alone, dealing with a sick baby and the anxiety that came with being the only person responsible for making decisions about Celeste's health. Why didn't you call me? He asked. Violette looked up at him with tired eyes. And tell you what? That your daughter was crying and I couldn't make it stop? You have a business to run, Beckett. Important meetings and deals that can't be postponed for baby drama. She's not drama, he said firmly. She's my daughter, and if she's sick or you're worried, I want to know. Before Violette could respond, the sound of crying drifted from the bedroom. Not the healthy wail of a baby demanding attention, but a weak, pitiful whimper that made both adults immediately alert. That's not her normal cry, Violette said, already moving toward the bedroom. Beckett followed her into the small room, where Celeste lay in a white crib positioned next to what was clearly Violette's bed. The baby's face was flushed, and her breathing seemed more labored than usual. She has a fever, Violette said, pressing her hand to Celeste's forehead. It wasn't there 2 hours ago. Without hesitation, she lifted Celeste from the crib, and the baby's weak cries intensified. We need to go to the hospital. Now. Beckett was already moving, grabbing the diaper bag from beside the dresser while Violette quickly changed Celeste into clean clothes. The practiced efficiency with which they worked together was instinctive, as if they had been co-parenting for years instead of days. My car is downstairs, Beckett said, taking the diaper bag from her hands. I'll drive. The trip to the hospital was tense and silent except for Celeste's intermittent whimpering from the back seat. Beckett found himself checking the rearview mirror constantly, watching Violette's face for any change in expression that might indicate their daughter was getting worse. She's going to be okay, he said, as much to convince himself as to comfort Violette. She's so little, Violette replied, her voice tight with worry. When she was in the NICU, every fever was a crisis. I know she's stronger now, but she's still your baby and you're scared, Beckett finished. That's normal. That's what good parents do, they worry. Violette glanced at him, surprised by the understanding in his voice. You're scared too. It wasn't a question and he didn't deny it. Terrified, he admitted. I've closed billion-dollar deals and negotiated with some of the most ruthless people in the world, but the thought of something happening to her makes me feel completely helpless. At the emergency room, they were quickly triaged and seen by a pediatric resident who examined Celeste thoroughly. The baby's fever had climbed to 102.1 degrees, high enough to be concerning but not immediately dangerous. It appears to be a viral infection, the doctor explained after running several tests. Common in babies her age, especially those who were born prematurely. Her lungs sound clear, which is good news given her medical history. Relief flooded through both parents, though they tried to hide it. The doctor prescribed infant acetaminophen to manage the fever and recommended close monitoring over the next 24 hours. She'll need someone with her constantly for the next day or two, the doctor added. Premature babies can deteriorate quickly with viral infections, so any changes in breathing, eating, or alertness should be reported immediately. As they drove home from the hospital, Celeste, sleeping peacefully in her car seat with her fever already beginning to respond to medication, Violette stared out the window in thoughtful silence. "What are you thinking about?" Beckett asked. 24-hour monitoring," she said quietly. "I'll have to call in sick to my transcription work, which means no income for the rest of the week." "I'll stay," Beckett said immediately. "I can work from here and help watch her." Violette turned to look at him. "You can't just cancel your schedule for the rest of the week. Don't you have that board meeting on Thursday? The one with the German pharmaceutical company?" The fact that she remembered details about his business schedule, even after 7 months apart, caught him off guard. "How did you—" "I still follow industry news," she said with a slight shrug. "Your company's potential merger has been all over the financial publications. The merger, it was worth over $2 billion and represented the culmination of 18 months of negotiations. The Thursday board meeting was crucial, a final presentation to convince the board of directors to approve the deal that would cement his company's position as a global leader in pharmaceutical innovation. "I can reschedule," he said, though they both knew how impossible that would be. The German executives were flying in specifically for Thursday's meeting, and too many moving parts were already in motion. "No," Violette said firmly. "You can't, and we both know it. I'll manage with Celeste just like I always have." "You don't have to manage alone anymore," Beckett insisted. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. But you do have other obligations," Violette pointed out. "Important ones that affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars. You can't just pretend those don't exist because you want to play house for a few days." Her words stung because they highlighted the fundamental tension he was trying to ignore. His business empire required his attention, his presence, his unwavering focus, but so did his daughter. And unlike his company, which could theoretically survive without him for short periods, Celeste was 3 weeks old and completely dependent on the adults in her life. "This isn't playing house," he said quietly. "This is our family." "Is it?" Violette's voice was soft but challenging. "Or is this you trying to ease your guilt by being present for a crisis? What happens next week when she's healthy and everything is routine again? What happens when the novelty wears off and being a father becomes just another obligation on your calendar?" They had arrived back at her apartment building, but neither made a move to get out of the car. Celeste continued sleeping in her car seat, blissfully unaware of the tension between her parents. "I know you think I'm going to leave again," Beckett said finally. "I know you think this is temporary, that I'll get bored or overwhelmed and disappear, but you're wrong. Am I?" Violette turned to face him fully. "Because 3 days ago, you didn't even know she existed. 3 days ago, your life was exactly the way you wanted it. Controlled, predictable, and child-free. Now you're asking me to believe that everything has changed because you held her for a few hours? Everything has changed," he said with quiet intensity. "The moment I saw her, the moment I held her, everything I thought I wanted became irrelevant." "Words are easy, Beckett," Violette said sadly. "You're good with words. You've always been good at saying what people want to hear. But being a father isn't about saying the right things, it's about showing up when it's hard and inconvenient, and when there's no audience to impress." She got out of the car and began unbuckling Celeste from her car seat, effectively ending the conversation. But as Beckett watched her carry their sleeping daughter toward the apartment building, he realized she was right to be skeptical. He had spent 3 days playing the role of devoted father, but he hadn't yet been tested. Thursday's board meeting would be his first real choice between his old life and his new one. And deep down, despite all his passionate declarations, he wasn't entirely sure which he would choose when the moment came. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Beckett's mood as he stood in his penthouse closet, staring at the navy Armani suit he had planned to wear to the most important board meeting of his career. His phone had been buzzing incessantly since 6 a.m. with messages from his assistant, his legal team, and the German executives confirming final details for the presentation. But his mind wasn't on the merger. It was on the text message he had received from Violette at 3 in the morning. Celeste's fever spiked again, back at the hospital. She's okay, but they want to keep her for observation. He had thrown on clothes and driven straight to the hospital, where he found Violette in the pediatric ward, holding Celeste while an IV dripped fluids into their daughter's tiny arm. The sight had nearly brought him to his knees. The doctor says it's just a precaution, Violette had assured him, but her eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion and worry. Her fever broke around 5, but they want to make sure she stays hydrated. Now 4 hours later, Beckett was supposed to be preparing for the presentation that would secure his company's future. Instead, he was debating whether to change into jeans and go back to the hospital. His phone rang, displaying his assistant's number. "Caroline," he answered, still staring at the suit. "Mr. Valiant. The Germans arrived this morning and are settled at the Meridian Hotel. The presentation materials are loaded and ready, and the board members are all confirmed for 2 o'clock. Is there anything else you need me to?" "Caroline," he interrupted, "what would happen if we postponed the meeting?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Postponed? Mr. Valiant, this merger has been 18 months in the making. The German executives flew here specifically for today's presentation. If we postpone now, I know what's at stake," Beckett said quietly. "I'm asking what would happen. Best case scenario? We could reschedule for next week, though Klaus Weber seemed very firm about their timeline. Worst case? They walk away and consider other acquisition targets. You know they've been courting that Swiss company as well." Beckett closed his eyes. The Swiss company was Novus Pharmaceuticals, his biggest competitor in the European market. If the Germans chose them instead, it would cost Valiant Industries billions in potential revenue and market share. "Mr. Valiant? Are you still there?" "I'm here," he said. "Give me an hour. I'll call you back." He hung up and immediately dialed Violette's number. "Hello." Her voice was soft, probably trying not to wake Celeste. "How is she?" "Better. Her fever hasn't returned and she's keeping fluids down. The doctor thinks we might be able to go home this afternoon." Violette paused. "Shouldn't you be getting ready for your meeting?" Beckett sat heavily on the edge of his bed, still holding his phone. "Tell me what you need. Do you need me to bring you food, coffee, a change of clothes?" "Beckett, I'm fine. Mrs. Henderson brought me everything I need and Celeste is stable. You don't have to." "I want to be there," he said, cutting her off. "I want to be with both of you. But you have that meeting, the important one." He was quiet for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical force. "What if I told you that meeting could wait?" "I'd say you were lying to yourself," Violette replied gently, "and probably to me. We both know how important this merger is to your company. And what if I told you that you and Celeste are more important?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Beckett, I'm serious, Violette. What if I chose to be at the hospital with my family instead of in a boardroom with people who only care about profit margins?" "I'd say you were making a mistake," she said quietly, "and that you'd probably resent us for it later." Her honesty was like a slap, but he knew she was right to be cautious. How many times had he promised to prioritize their relationship over work, only to break that promise when a crisis arose? How many dinners had he missed? How many weekend plans had he canceled? How many times had he chosen the company over everything else? What if this time was different, he asked. How do I know it would be? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. How could he prove that his feelings had changed when his track record suggested otherwise? How could he ask her to trust him when he had already proven himself untrustworthy? "You can't know," he said finally. "You have to trust me, and I know that's asking a lot." "It's asking everything," Violette whispered. "I can't let myself believe you've changed only to watch you walk away again. I won't survive it, and more importantly, Celeste doesn't deserve that kind of instability." After they hung up, Beckett sat in his closet for another 20 minutes, staring at the suit that represented everything he had worked to build. Valiant Industries was his legacy, his contribution to the world, the tangible proof of his worth and intelligence. Walking away from the merger would jeopardize all of it. But as he thought about Celeste's tiny hand gripping his finger, about Violette's exhausted face in the hospital waiting room, about the family he had unknowingly abandoned, the suit began to look like a costume for a role he wasn't sure he wanted to play anymore. His phone buzzed with another text from Caroline. "Klaus Weber called, wants to confirm timing for this afternoon's presentation." Beckett stared at the message for a long moment, then typed his response. "Tell Klaus that I need to reschedule. Family emergency." Caroline's response came immediately. "Are you sure? This could cost us the deal." "I'm sure," he typed back. then added, "Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the week. And Caroline, if Klaus walks away because I chose my family over a meeting, then he was never the right partner for us anyway." He changed into jeans and a sweater, grabbed his car keys and drove back to the hospital. He found Violette in the same chair where he had left her, but Celeste was awake now, looking alert and more like herself. "You came back," Violette said, surprise evident in her voice. "I told you I would," Beckett replied, settling into the chair beside hers. "How is she feeling?" "Much better. Look." Violette held Celeste up and the baby smiled at the sight of her father, reaching out with both hands. Beckett took her gently, marveling at how much more comfortable he felt holding her compared to just a few days ago. "Hello, beautiful girl. You gave us quite a scare. What about your meeting?" Violette asked quietly. "Postponed," Beckett said, not taking his eyes off Celeste. "Klaus Weber will have to wait." "Beckett, you can't just cancel a billion-dollar merger because my daughter was in the hospital?" He looked at Violette with steady eyes. "Yes, I can. I did." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of regret or resentment. "You're going to lose the deal." "Maybe," he admitted. "Probably. But I'd rather lose a business deal than lose the chance to be the father Celeste deserves." "And if you regret it? If the company suffers because of this choice?" Beckett considered the question seriously. He had built Valiant Industries from nothing, pouring his heart and soul into creating something that would outlast him. But looking at Celeste's bright eyes and feeling her small hand grip his finger, he realized that his daughter would outlast him too, and she was infinitely more important than any business empire. "Then I'll figure out how to rebuild," he said simply. "But I can't get back the moments I miss with her. I can't undo walking away again if that's what I choose." Violette's eyes filled with tears. "This is really what you want? To be here with us, instead of closing the biggest deal of your career? This is where I belong," Beckett said, his voice firm with conviction. "With my family." For the first time since their reunion at the hospital 4 days ago, Violette smiled, really smiled, the kind of radiant expression that had first made him fall in love with her years ago. "She needs to be fed soon," Violette said softly. "And I could use some real coffee, not the hospital vending machine kind." "I'll get coffee," Beckett said, carefully transferring Celeste back to her mother's arms. "The good kind, from that place you like." As he walked toward the elevator, Beckett felt his phone buzzing with what he assumed were frantic messages from his team about the canceled meeting. But for the first time in his adult life, he didn't check his phone. Instead, he thought about the small family waiting for him upstairs and realized that choosing them over everything else didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like coming home. 2 weeks later, Beckett sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Valiant Industries building, staring at the termination letter from Weber Schmidt Pharmaceuticals. The German company had officially withdrawn from merger negotiations, citing reliability concerns regarding executive commitment to corporate obligations. Within hours of that announcement, Novus Pharmaceuticals had announced their acquisition by Weber Schmidt for $3 billion. Exactly the deal that should have been his. His phone had been ringing incessantly for days, board members demanding explanations, investors questioning his judgment, financial journalists asking for comments about the Valiant meltdown. His stock price had dropped 12% in the past week alone. Caroline knocked on his door and entered without waiting for permission. Her usual professional composure cracked with stress. "Mr. Valiant, the board is requesting an emergency meeting. Today, at 4 o'clock. She set a thick folder on his desk. "These are the preliminary reports on how the failed merger will affect quarterly projections. It's not good." Beckett glanced at the folder but didn't open it. "Anything else?" Klaus Weber gave an interview to Financial Today. He said, and I quote, "Valiant Industries lacks the corporate discipline necessary for global partnership." The interview runs in tomorrow's edition. Caroline waited for his response. Anger, damage control strategies, perhaps instructions to schedule meetings with crisis management consultants. Instead, Beckett simply nodded. "Thank you for the update, Caroline. I'll review the reports this afternoon." "Sir, with respect, this is a crisis. The board is talking about voting no confidence. Some of the major investors are threatening to pull out. We need to act quickly to—" "Caroline," Beckett interrupted gently. "Have you ever been in love?" His assistant blinked, clearly thrown by the unexpected question. Yes, sir. I'm engaged, actually. We're getting married next spring. Would you cancel your wedding if I told you it was important for the company?" What?" Would you leave your fiancé at the altar if there was a board meeting that needed your attention? Caroline stared at him as if he had lost his mind. No, sir. Of course not, but I don't understand. 2 weeks ago I made a choice, Beckett said, standing up and walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. I chose my family over a business deal. It was the right choice, Caroline. Even knowing what it would cost, it was the right choice. But sir, the company will survive, Beckett said firmly. We'll find other partnerships, other opportunities. But I only get one chance to be Celeste's father. I only get one chance to show Violette that she and our daughter mean more to me than profit margins. Caroline was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected side of her notoriously driven boss. Celeste is your daughter? 3 weeks old, Beckett said, his voice softening. The most beautiful little girl you've ever seen. She has my stubborn chin but her mother's smile. I didn't know you had a family, sir. Neither did I until 2 weeks ago. He turned back to face her. Caroline, I need you to clear my schedule every evening at 6. No exceptions and no meetings before 9 in the morning. Sir, your schedule is usually packed until 8 or 9 at night. Not anymore, Beckett said decisively. I have a daughter to read bedtime stories to. An hour later, Beckett was driving through Brooklyn Heights, having left the office despite the crisis brewing around him. He had become a regular fixture at Violette's apartment, arriving each evening with dinner and staying until Celeste's bedtime. It was a routine that felt both foreign and natural, as if he were learning to inhabit a life he should have been living all along. He found Violette in the small park across from her building, pushing Celeste in a baby swing while the afternoon sun filtered through the autumn leaves. The sight of them, his 2 girls, content and peaceful, made everything else in his life fade into background noise. You're early today, Violette observed as he approached, though she was smiling. Board meeting got postponed, he said. Which was true. He had postponed it himself, asking Caroline to reschedule for tomorrow morning. How's the aftermath? Violette asked quietly. She had been following the news coverage of the failed merger, watching his company's stock price drop and reading the increasingly critical articles about his leadership. Messy, Beckett admitted, settling onto the bench beside the playground. Klaus Weber made some pointed comments about my lack of corporate discipline. Do you regret it? The question was casual, but he could hear the underlying tension in her voice. Beckett watched Celeste giggle as the swing carried her gently back and forth, her chubby hands gripping the safety bar with determination. She was wearing a pink coat with tiny flower buttons and matching hat that framed her face perfectly. Look at her, he said softly. Look how happy she is. 2 weeks ago I didn't even know she existed. Now I can't imagine a world without her laugh, without her smile, without the way she reaches for me when I walk into the room. He turned to face Violette. How could I regret choosing that? Violette's eyes filled with tears. Even if it cost you everything you built? What I built was a company, Beckett said. What we have is a family. There's no comparison. She stopped pushing the swing and sat beside him on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. I never expected you to say that. Even 2 weeks ago when you first held her, you didn't think I could change, he finished. I didn't think you'd want to change. Your work was everything to you. Your identity, your purpose, your passion. I thought maybe you'd try to fit us into the margins of that life, but I never imagined you'd be willing to rebuild your priorities completely. Beckett reached over and took her hand, the simple contact sending warmth through both of them. I thought I knew what success looked like. Corner office, billion-dollar deals, respect from competitors, fear from rivals. But success is coming home to you and Celeste. Success is being the person you both deserve, not the person I thought I had to be. Violette stared down at their joined hands. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Of what? Of believing this is real. Of trusting that you won't wake up one morning and decide that corporate success is more important than domestic happiness. Of letting myself fall in love with you again only to watch you choose your company over our family. Beckett lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. What if I told you I was already planning to step back from day-to-day operations? What if I told you I wanted to spend less time in boardrooms and more time watching Celeste learn to crawl? I'd say that sounds like a fantasy, Violette whispered, but her grip on his hand tightened. Then let me make it a reality, Beckett said. Let me prove that choosing you and Celeste wasn't a moment of crisis management. It was the best decision I've ever made. Celeste had grown tired of the swing and was making the fussy sounds that indicated she wanted attention. Violette started to get up, but Beckett was already moving, lifting their daughter from the swing and settling her against his chest. "Hey, beautiful girl," he murmured, and Celeste immediately calmed, her small hand fisting in his shirt. "Are you ready to go home?" The word home hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Beckett realized he had been thinking of Violette's small apartment as home for days now, despite having a penthouse worth millions just across the river. "Beckett," Violette said as they walked back toward the apartment building, "what if your board forces you out? What if the company falls apart because of the choices you're making? Then I'll start something new," he said simply. "Something that allows me to be the father and partner I want to be. Maybe a smaller company, maybe consulting work, maybe something completely different. The point is, I'll figure it out, but I won't figure it out at the expense of this family." As they climbed the stairs to her apartment, Celeste babbling contentedly in his arms, Violette felt something shift in her chest. For 7 months, she had protected her heart by expecting the worst from him. But watching him choose their family over and over again, seeing the genuine joy on his face when he played with Celeste, hearing the certainty in his voice when he talked about their future together, it was becoming impossible to maintain her defensive walls. "Stay for dinner," she said as they reached her door. "I'm making pasta, and there's more than enough." It wasn't the first time she had invited him to stay for dinner, but something about the way she said it felt different, more permanent, more like a real invitation into their life, not just a temporary arrangement. "I'd love to," Beckett replied, and meant it completely. As Violette unlocked the door and they stepped into the warm, cozy apartment that had become his sanctuary, Beckett realized that losing the merger might have been the best thing that ever happened to him. It had forced him to choose, clearly and definitively, between the life he thought he wanted and the life that actually made him happy. And for the first time in his adult life, he had chosen love over everything else. 3 weeks into their new routine, Beckett was learning to navigate the strange but wonderful rhythm of family life. Mornings began with coffee shared over Celeste's high chair, while she messily explored pureed sweet potatoes. Evenings ended with him reading "Good Night Moon" in increasingly ridiculous voices, until their daughter giggled herself to sleep. His penthouse had become little more than a place to store his expensive suits, while Violette's small apartment had become the center of his universe, which was why the knock on the door at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening felt like an intrusion into their carefully constructed sanctuary. Violette looked up from where she sat on the floor, gently playing with Celeste during tummy time. "Were you expecting someone?" "No," Beckett said, frowning as he moved toward the door. "Mrs. Henderson usually calls before coming up." He opened the door to find a woman he hadn't seen in over a year, though her presence immediately filled the small apartment with tension. Diana Ashford stood in the hallway, perfectly composed in a charcoal designer dress and pearls, her auburn hair styled in an elegant chignon. She was everything Violette wasn't: polished, sophisticated, and from Beckett's world of corporate power and old money. "Hello, Beckett," Diana said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Behind him, Beckett heard Violette's sharp intake of breath. She would recognize Diana from the society pages, from the photos that had run in business magazines when Diana's family's investment firm had partnered with Valiant Industries on several major deals. What Violette didn't know was that Diana had been Beckett's on-and-off companion for several years before he met Violette, and that she had made it very clear she expected to resume that relationship after his unfortunate entanglement with the younger woman ended. "Diana," Beckett said carefully, not moving aside to let her enter, "this isn't a good time." "Oh, but it's the perfect time," Diana replied, her gaze moving past him to take in the domestic scene beyond. Her eyes lingered on Violette, who was now holding Celeste protectively, and on the baby toys scattered across the living room floor. "I've been hearing such interesting rumors about your new situation. What do you want?" Beckett's voice carried a warning edge that Diana chose to ignore. "May I come in? I think we need to discuss some rather urgent business matters, all of us," she added, her smile sharpening as she looked directly at Violette. Reluctantly, Beckett stepped aside. Diana entered the apartment as if she were conducting a royal inspection, her calculating gaze taking in every detail of the modest space that had become his refuge. "How charming," she said, though her tone suggested anything but charm. "Very cozy. And this must be the baby I've heard so much about." Violette stood slowly, Celeste balanced on her hip, her maternal instincts clearly on high alert. "I'm Violette," she said with polite coldness. "And you are?" "Diana Ashford," came the reply, accompanied by a smile that was all teeth. "I'm an old friend of Beckett's. A very old friend. The emphasis on very was deliberate, and Beckett felt his jaw clench. Diana, whatever you have to say, you can say it to me privately. This doesn't concern. Oh, but it does concern Violette, Diana interrupted smoothly. You see the board meeting you've been avoiding? The one where they plan to discuss your recent lapses in judgment. I thought she should know what's really at stake. Violette's arms tightened around Celeste. What is she talking about, Beckett? The Valiant Industries Board of Directors is meeting tomorrow, Diana explained before Beckett could respond. They're voting on a motion of no confidence. If it passes, Beckett will be removed as CEO of the company he built. That's enough, Beckett said sharply, but Diana continued as if he hadn't spoken. The failed merger was just the beginning. Missing critical meetings, ignoring investor concerns, allowing stock prices to plummet while he plays house. The board has lost faith in his leadership. Playing house? Violette repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. Well, what else would you call this? Diana gestured around the apartment dismissively. A billionaire CEO abandoning his responsibilities to change diapers and attend pediatrician appointments? It's quite the novelty, I'm sure, but hardly sustainable. Beckett stepped forward, his voice low and controlled. Diana, I'm going to ask you once more to leave now. I'm not finished, Diana said, her composure never wavering. You see, Violette, the board has asked me to make Beckett an offer. My family's investment firm is prepared to provide emergency capital to stabilize Valiant Industries, but only if he returns to full-time leadership immediately. And? Violette asked, though Beckett could see she was already beginning to understand where this was leading. And if he continues this domestic experiment, if he continues to prioritize personal relationships over corporate responsibilities, the company will fail. 3,000 employees will lose their jobs. Shareholders will lose billions, all because he decided to play father to a child he didn't even know existed until a month ago. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Beckett saw Violette flinch, saw the doubt creep into her eyes as Diana's implications sank in. 3,000 people's livelihoods hanging in the balance because he had chosen to read bedtime stories and attend doctor's appointments. That's not how this works, Beckett said firmly. The company's problems existed long before. Did they? Diana interrupted. Because your stock price was quite healthy until news of your canceled meetings and missed obligations began circulating. Your reputation for reliability and focus was your greatest asset, Beckett, and you've thrown it away for this. Her gesture encompassed Violette and Celeste, reducing them to obstacles in his path to continued success. Violette was very quiet, her face pale as she processed Diana's words. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant. Is it true? About the board meeting? Beckett hesitated for a fraction of a second. Too long. Yes, but… And the jobs? The 3,000 employees? Violette, it's not that simple. It actually is that simple, Diana interjected smoothly. Beckett returns to his full responsibilities as CEO, or Valiant Industries faces bankruptcy within 6 months. It's quite straightforward, really. Celeste, picking up on the tension in the room, began to fuss. Violette automatically began the gentle swaying motion that usually calmed her, but her eyes remained fixed on Beckett's face. You didn't tell me it was this serious, she said quietly. I didn't want you to worry. You didn't want me to feel guilty, Violette corrected. You didn't want me to know that choosing us might cost 3,000 people their jobs. That's not… Beckett stopped, frustrated by his inability to explain the complex financial and political maneuvering that was really behind the company's troubles. Diana is oversimplifying the situation. Am I? Diana pulled a folder from her designer handbag and set it on Violette's small kitchen table. These are the preliminary reports from the board's financial analysts. Perhaps you'd like to review them yourself. Violette looked at the folder as if it contained a bomb. I don't need to read corporate reports to understand what's happening here. Violette, Beckett said urgently, don't let her manipulate. Is she wrong? Violette interrupted, her green eyes burning with unshed tears. Is she lying when she says that your company is failing because you chose us? Beckett felt trapped between honesty and protection, between the woman he loved and the business he had built. The company is facing challenges, yes, but they're not insurmountable, and they're not entirely due to… But they're partially due to your choices, Violette pressed. Partially due to choosing Celeste and me over your responsibilities. You're not responsibilities, Beckett said fiercely. You're my family. You're what matters most. And what about the families of those 3,000 employees? Diana asked with false concern. Don't their children matter too? The question hung in the air like a blade, cutting through every defense Beckett had built around his new priorities. He watched Violette's face crumble as the full weight of Diana's manipulation hit home. I need you to leave, Violette said quietly, addressing Diana. Both of you. I need to think. Violette, please. Beckett started, but she was already moving toward the bedroom with Celeste. Just, please go, she said without looking back. I can't think with both of you here. Diana's smile was triumphant as she gathered her purse. The board meeting is at 10 tomorrow morning, Beckett. I do hope you'll make the right choice. After Diana left, Beckett stood alone in the apartment that had been his refuge, listening to the sound of Violette quietly crying in the bedroom. Every instinct told him to go to her, to hold her, to explain that Diana's ultimatum was a manipulation designed to tear them apart. But the folder of financial reports remained on the table, and the weight of 3,000 jobs pressed down on him like a physical force. For the first time since he had chosen his family over the merger, Beckett wondered if love was enough to overcome the impossible choices that seemed determined to tear them apart. Beckett spent the night in his car, parked across the street from Violette's building, unable to bring himself to return to his empty penthouse but unwilling to leave his family unprotected. He watched the lights in her apartment go on and off throughout the night, imagining her pacing the floors with Celeste, wrestling with the impossible choice Diana had laid before them. At 6 in the morning, his phone rang. Caroline's name appeared on the screen. The board meeting has been moved up to 8 o'clock, she said without preamble. Diana Ashford called an emergency session. Sir, I think you need to know. She's been speaking privately with board members all week. Whatever she's planning, it's bigger than just a vote of no confidence. Beckett closed his eyes, leaning back against the leather seat. What have you heard? Rumors about a hostile takeover. Her family's investment firm has been quietly acquiring shares through shell companies. If she can get you removed as CEO, she might have enough backing to take control of the entire company. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Diana's visit to the apartment hadn't been about saving Valiant Industries. It had been about destroying his personal life so completely that he would have no choice but to return to the company she was planning to steal from him. Caroline, I need you to do something for me, Beckett said, starting his car. I need you to pull the records on every major decision that led to our current financial difficulties. Every missed opportunity, every bad investment, every strategic mistake. I want to know exactly when our problem started and who was involved. Sir, that will take hours. You have 2 hours, Beckett said. And Carolyn, look specifically at any deals or partnerships that involved Diana's firm. As he drove back to Manhattan, Beckett's mind raced through months of board meetings, strategic decisions, and financial reports. Diana had been involved in several major partnerships over the past year, always positioning herself as a trusted advisor, always offering solutions that seemed beneficial in the short term but costly in the long run. He arrived at the Valiant Industries building with 30 minutes to spare before the board meeting. Caroline met him in the lobby with a thick folder and a grim expression. You were right to be suspicious, she said as they rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. Diana's firm has been systematically undermining your company's partnerships for the past 18 months. The merger with Weber-Schmidt would have threatened a deal she was orchestrating with a competing Swiss company. She needed you to fail. Beckett opened the folder and scanned the documents Caroline had assembled. Financial records, email communications, partnership agreements, all painting a picture of calculated sabotage disguised as helpful consultation. She's been playing a long game, Caroline continued. Get close to you personally, gain access to inside information, then use that information to position her own clients advantageously while making your deals fall apart. And when I started prioritizing my family over the company, I gave her the perfect excuse to accelerate her timeline, Beckett realized. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Beckett looked at the folder in his hands, then at the view of Brooklyn visible through the elevator's glass walls. Somewhere across the river, Violette was probably feeding Celeste breakfast, both of them unaware that their future was about to be decided in a corporate boardroom. I'm going to fight, he said quietly, but not the way Diana expects. The boardroom was already full when Beckett arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. 12 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces grim and uncomfortable. Diana sat at the far end, perfectly composed and radiating confidence. Beckett, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, so glad you could join us. I was beginning to worry that you had more pressing domestic obligations. Actually, Beckett said, taking his seat at the head of the table, my domestic obligations are exactly what I want to discuss today. Murmurs rippled around the table. This was not what anyone had expected. Before we discuss the vote of no confidence, Beckett continued, I want to tell you about my daughter. Diana's smile faltered slightly. Beckett, I'm not sure personal matters are. Her name is Celeste, he continued, ignoring Diana's interruption. She's 6 weeks old, and she was born 6 weeks premature. She spent the first 3 weeks of her life in the NICU, fighting for every breath while her mother sat beside her incubator alone, because I didn't even know she existed. The board members exchanged confused glances. This was not the corporate crisis management they had expected. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that I was a father. I also discovered that I had been living my life completely backwards, prioritizing profit over people, transactions over relationships, quarterly reports over the things that actually matter. Beckett, Board Chairman Robert Hayes interrupted gently. While we're happy for your personal revelations, we need to address the company's financial crisis. Which brings me to this, Beckett said, opening Caroline's folder and distributing copies of the documents around the table. Evidence that our financial crisis has been deliberately orchestrated by someone sitting at this very table. Diana's composure cracked for the first time. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime, Beckett replied calmly. Corporate sabotage, insider trading, fraudulent manipulation of partnership agreements. Caroline, would you please read the highlighted sections from Ms. Ashford's email communications with Weber Schmidt? As Caroline began reading the damning evidence of Diana's betrayal, Beckett watched the board members' faces change from confusion to understanding to outrage. Diana had played them all, using their trust in her family's reputation to gain access to information she then used to destroy the very company she claimed to want to save. This is preposterous, Diana said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. These documents could be fabricated. They could be, Beckett agreed, which is why I've already forwarded copies to the SEC and the FBI. I'm sure they'll be very thorough in their investigation. The room erupted in angry voices as board members demanded explanations, and Diana's face went white with shock and rage. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed at Beckett. My family has more power and connections than you can imagine. We'll destroy you. No, Beckett said quietly, and something in his voice cut through the chaos. You won't, because I'm resigning as CEO of Valiant Industries, effective immediately. Stunned silence fell over the room. I'm resigning, Beckett repeated, but not because of a vote of no confidence and not because of Diana's manipulations. I'm resigning because I've finally learned what success actually looks like. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he had conquered through sheer will and determination. Success isn't a corner office or a billion-dollar company or the respect of competitors. Success is being the man my daughter deserves as a father. Success is being worthy of the woman I love. Success is building a life that matters, not just a business that profits. He turned back to face the room. I'm recommending that the board promote Jonathan Walsh to CEO. He's been overseeing operations excellently, and he has the vision and integrity to lead this company forward. As for Diana's attempted takeover, well, that's going to be difficult to execute from federal prison. Diana stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over, Beckett. Yes, he said calmly. It is. As the boardroom erupted in chaos behind him, Beckett walked out of the building where he had spent the last 15 years of his life and felt nothing but relief. He had one stop to make before going home to his family. 20 minutes later, he knocked on the door of Violette's apartment, his heart hammering against his ribs. She opened it slowly, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Celeste balanced on her hip. I resigned, he said without preamble. Violette stared at him. What? I resigned as CEO. Diana was using the company's financial problems to manipulate both of us. She's been sabotaging partnerships for months, trying to position herself for a hostile takeover. I exposed her to the board and then I walked away. But the jobs, the 3,000 employees, will be fine, Beckett said. Better than fine, actually. With competent leadership and without Diana's interference. The company was never in as much trouble as she claimed. Violette's legs seemed to give out, and she sank onto the couch, clutching Celeste tightly. You gave up everything, she whispered. For us. I didn't give up anything, Beckett said, kneeling in front of her. I chose everything that matters. I chose you and Celeste and the family we can build together. I chose love over fear, happiness over obligation, and real success over the illusion of power. Tears streamed down Violette's face. But your life's work, my life's work is loving you and raising our daughter, Beckett said firmly. Everything else was just preparation for this moment, this choice, this family. He reached out and touched Celeste's cheek, and the baby immediately reached for him, babbling happily as if she had been waiting for him to come home. I want to marry you, Beckett said suddenly, the words spilling out before he could second-guess himself. Not because it's expected or convenient, but because I can't imagine a life without you and Celeste in it. I want to wake up to her smile and fall asleep to your voice every day for the rest of my life. Violette was crying too hard to speak, but she was nodding, and when he pulled her into his arms, she melted against him as if she had been holding her breath for 7 months and could finally exhale. Is that a yes? He whispered against her hair. Yes, she managed between tears. Yes, to all of it. Yes, to everything. As they held each other, Celeste babbling contentedly between them, Beckett realized that Diana had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't playing house. This was building a home. This was choosing love over everything else and discovering that love was the only thing that had ever really mattered. 6 months later, Beckett stood in the small garden behind Violette's apartment building, adjusting his tie for the 5th time in 10 minutes. The space had been transformed with white roses and twinkling lights strung between the old oak trees, creating an intimate chapel under the October sky. Mrs. Henderson bustled around, making final adjustments to the modest flower arrangements while keeping one eye on Celeste, who was crawling energetically across a blanket in her flower girl dress. Stop fidgeting, Mrs. Henderson scolded gently, as she passed him with an armload of white peonies. You look perfect, and you know it. Beckett smiled, though his hands shook slightly as he straightened his cuffs. In his previous life, he had given presentations to hundreds of investors without breaking a sweat. But the thought of promising forever to Violette in front of their small gathering of friends and family left him uncharacteristically nervous. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change and adjustment. After resigning from Valiant Industries, he had started a small consulting firm specializing in ethical business practices and family-friendly corporate policies. It was modest compared to his former empire, but it allowed him to work from home 3 days a week and never miss Celeste's bedtime stories. Diana Ashford had indeed faced federal charges for corporate manipulation and insider trading. The last Beckett had heard, she was negotiating a plea deal that would likely result in several years in federal prison. Valiant Industries, under Jonathan Walsh's leadership, had not only recovered from its financial difficulties but had posted record profits in the most recent quarter. But none of that mattered today. Today was about the family he had chosen, the love he had finally learned to prioritize, and the future he was building one day at a time. Daddy nervous? Celeste babbled from her blanket, and Beckett's heart still skipped a beat every time she called him that. At 6 months old, she was sitting up with support and had started babbling sounds that included mama, dada, and excited squeals when she saw her parents. A little bit, sweetheart, he admitted, scooping her up and settling her on his hip. But the good kind of nervous, the kind that means something wonderful is about to happen. The sound of a violin drifted through the garden as the small string quartet began the processional music. Beckett's heart hammered against his ribs as he took his position beneath the flower-covered archway, Celeste still in his arms. She would walk down the aisle with her mother, but he couldn't resist holding her for these last few moments before everything changed. The guests, barely 20 people but including everyone who mattered, turned toward the apartment building as the music swelled. Mrs. Henderson appeared first, radiant in lavender silk and carrying a bouquet of white roses. She had insisted on giving Violette away, declaring that someone needed to make sure Beckett was worthy of her girls. And then Violette appeared, and Beckett's breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple but elegant cream-colored dress that fell to her ankles, with delicate lace sleeves and a fitted bodice that showed off her graceful figure. Her honey-blonde hair was swept up in a loose chignon with small white flowers tucked behind one ear. But it was her smile, radiant, joyful, completely without reservation, that made his knees weak. In her arms, she carried Celeste's twin, not literally, but a baby doll dressed in a matching flower girl dress that their daughter had insisted on bringing to the ceremony. Celeste immediately reached for her baby sister when she spotted it, babbling excitedly. As Violette walked toward him down the short aisle between their friends, Beckett felt tears sting his eyes. 7 months ago, He had been a man obsessed with control, convinced that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Now looking at the woman who had taught him what really mattered, and the daughter who had shown him what unconditional love looked like, he understood that everything before this moment had been practice for the life that was about to begin. "Hi," Violette said softly when she reached him, her green eyes sparkling with unshed tears. "Hi yourself," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You look incredible. You clean up pretty well yourself," she said, straightening his tie with her free hand while Celeste reached for him from her arms. The officiant, a gentle older minister who had known Mrs. Henderson for decades, stepped forward with a warm smile. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today not just to witness a marriage, but to celebrate a love story that proves it's never too late to choose what truly matters." Beckett and Violette have learned that the greatest success in life isn't measured in dollars or achievements, but in the depth of our connections to the people we love. As the ceremony continued, Beckett found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain of Violette's departure, the shock of discovering Celeste, the gradual transformation of his priorities, and the ultimate choice between the life he thought he wanted and the life that actually made him happy. "Do you, Beckett James Valiant," the minister continued, "take Violette Marie Leroux to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Beckett said, his voice strong and clear. "I absolutely do." "And do you, Violette Marie Leroux, take Beckett James Valiant to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Violette whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Forever and always, I do." As they exchanged rings, simple platinum bands that Beckett had chosen specifically because they were nothing like the ostentatious diamond he had given her years ago, Celeste began to clap and babble, as if she understood that something momentous was happening. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York," the minister said with a broad smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Beckett, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft and sweet, and filled with promise. As their lips met, Celeste squealed with delight and reached for both of her parents, wanting to be part of the moment that was making everyone around them cry happy tears. The reception was held in Mrs. Henderson's bookstore, with the shelves pushed back to create space for dancing, and the cafe area converted to serve dinner for their small guest list. Beckett had wanted to rent out an elegant ballroom, but Violette had insisted that their wedding should reflect their real life, modest, intimate, and surrounded by the people and places that had supported them through their journey. As the evening wound down and the last of their guests drifted away, Beckett found himself alone with his new wife in the small garden where they had just promised each other forever. Celeste was sleeping peacefully in her portable crib, exhausted from a day of being the center of attention. "No regrets?" Violette asked, settling onto the bench beside him and leaning against his shoulder. "About what?" Beckett replied, wrapping his arm around her and pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "About giving up the corporate empire to marry a single mother and become a full-time father." Beckett was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. His old life seemed like something that had happened to someone else. The endless meetings, the constant pressure, the hollow victories that never quite satisfied the hunger for more. "You know what I regret?" he said finally. "I regret that it took me so long to find you. I regret the 7 months I missed with Celeste. I regret that I was ever stupid enough to think that money and power were more important than love." He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "But I don't regret a single decision I've made since the day I saw you in that hospital. Choosing you and Celeste over everything else wasn't a sacrifice, Violette. It was the smartest business decision I ever made, because I invested in something that actually grows in value over time." Violette laughed through her tears. "Only you would describe our marriage as a business decision. The best merger I've ever negotiated," Beckett said with a grin, then grew serious again. "I love you, Mrs. Valiant. I love our daughter and I love the life we're building together. This is what success looks like. Not a corner office or a stock portfolio, but coming home to you and Celeste every night and waking up grateful for another day of this beautiful chaos." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Celeste stirred in her crib and made the soft sounds that indicated she was waking up. Violette moved to check on her, and Beckett followed, both of them automatically falling into the rhythm of parenting they had developed over the past months. "I think someone wants to be part of the conversation," Violette said, As she lifted their sleepy daughter from the crib, Celeste rubbed her eyes and looked around at the fairy light-lit garden, then at her parents in their wedding attire. She pointed at Violette's flowers and babbled something that sounded suspiciously like pretty. "Yes, sweetheart," Beckett said, taking her from Violette's arms. "Mama is very pretty, and now she's officially stuck with us forever." "Forever," Violette repeated, testing the word on her tongue. "I like the sound of that." As they stood together in their small garden sanctuary, husband, wife, and daughter, Beckett realized that Diana had been wrong about more than just her corporate manipulations. She had said that love wasn't sustainable in the face of real-world pressures, that domestic happiness was just a fantasy that would crumble under the weight of actual responsibility. But looking at his family, feeling the solid weight of Celeste in his arms, and the warmth of Violette's hand in his, Beckett knew that love wasn't the fantasy. Everything else had been the fantasy, the endless pursuit of more money, more power, more recognition, the belief that success could be measured in quarterly reports and stock prices. The illusion that he could build a meaningful life without the people who made that life worth living. This, his wife's laughter as Celeste tried to grab the flowers from her hair, his daughter's complete trust as she settled against his chest, the quiet contentment of knowing he was exactly where he belonged. This was reality. This was what he had been working toward his entire life without knowing it. "So," Violette said as they began walking toward the apartment building, ready to start their first night as a married family, "what do you want to do for our honeymoon? How about we put Celeste to bed, order pizza, and fall asleep watching terrible movies on your tiny couch?" Beckett suggested. "That sounds perfect," Violette said, and meant it completely. As they climbed the stairs to what was now officially their shared home, Beckett felt a peace settle over him that he had never experienced in all his years of corporate success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, and probably very little sleep thanks to their energetic toddler. But tonight, he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the love he had almost been too blind to recognize, and the family that had saved him from a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt empty from within. The billionaire who had once believed that love was a luxury he couldn't afford, had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Love wasn't something you could afford, or not afford. It was something you chose every single day in big moments and small ones, through crisis and calm, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse. And Beckett Valiant had chosen love, forever. 3 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the renovated brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, illuminating the cheerful chaos of a family breakfast. Beckett sat at the kitchen table, laptop open beside his coffee cup, responding to emails from his consulting clients while simultaneously cutting pancakes into bite-sized pieces for 3-year-old Celeste. "Daddy, more syrup," Celeste declared, pointing at her plate with the authority of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. "What do we say?" Violette prompted gently from her position at the stove, where she was flipping another batch of pancakes while cradling their 6-month-old son, Oliver, against her chest. "Please," Celeste amended with an angelic smile that she had clearly inherited from her mother. Beckett drizzled a small amount of syrup over her pancakes, then glanced at his laptop screen where a video call was waiting. "Sorry, sweetheart, but Daddy has to take this call. It's the Peterson Foundation, and they want to discuss the family-friendly workplace initiative." "Important work," Violette said, settling Oliver in his high chair before joining them at the table. "But not more important than family breakfast." "Never more important than family breakfast," Beckett agreed, closing the laptop decisively. "David can wait 15 minutes. Pancakes with my wife and children come first." It was a small moment, unremarkable in its ordinariness, but it represented everything that had changed in Beckett's life. 3 years ago, he would have taken the call immediately, apologizing to his family for the interruption while prioritizing business over everything else. Now the foundation executives could wait until he had finished helping his daughter with her pancakes and discussing the day's plans with his wife. The brownstone they now called home was nothing like Beckett's former penthouse, but it was infinitely more comfortable. Violette had insisted on keeping it modest. 4 bedrooms, a small office for Beckett's consulting work, and a backyard where Celeste could play safely. Mrs. Henderson lived in the apartment above her bookstore 2 blocks away, close enough to babysit regularly, but far enough to give the young family their independence. "What time is your interview with Forbes today?" Violette asked, wiping Oliver's face with practiced efficiency. 2 o'clock, Beckett replied, bouncing Celeste on his knee as she finished her breakfast. They want to discuss the success of the family-first consulting model and how other executives can transition away from traditional corporate structures. And what are you going to tell them? Beckett considered the question as he looked around their kitchen, at the children's artwork covering the refrigerator, at the family photos clustered on the windowsill, at his wife's gentle smile as she nursed their son. I'm going to tell them that success isn't about how much money you make or how many companies you can acquire, he said. It's about being present for the people who love you. It's about building a life that matters, not just a business that profits. His consulting firm, Valiant Family Solutions, specialized in helping high-powered executives create better work-life balance and implement family-friendly policies in their companies. It was ironic that his greatest professional success had come from teaching other people to do what he had once been completely unable to do himself, prioritize personal relationships over corporate achievements. Speaking of which, Violette said, glancing at the clock, don't you have that site visit at the Johnson manufacturing plant this morning? I do, Beckett said, lifting Celeste from his lap and setting her down gently. But first, I have a very important meeting with a certain little girl about what book we're going to read tonight. Celeste clapped her hands together. The princess one, with the dragon. The princess one with the dragon it is, Beckett agreed, kneeling down to her level. But only if you promise to be good for Mama while I'm at work. I promise, Daddy, Celeste said solemnly, then threw her arms around his neck in a hug that made his heart feel too big for his chest. As Beckett prepared to leave for his morning appointments, he caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror. Gone were the expensive suits and Italian leather shoes, replaced by khakis and a button-down shirt that could survive the occasional spilled juice or sticky fingers. His hair was slightly mussed from Celeste's enthusiastic goodbye hug, and there were dark circles under his eyes from Oliver's latest growth spurt that had disrupted everyone's sleep. He looked like exactly what he was, a working father who had learned to balance professional responsibilities with personal priorities, and he had never been happier. The day passed in the comfortable rhythm he had developed over the past 3 years. A morning spent touring a manufacturing facility and discussing how they could implement flexible scheduling for working parents. A lunch meeting with a CEO who wanted to transition from 70-hour work weeks to a more sustainable 40-hour schedule without sacrificing company performance. An afternoon interview with Forbes about the growing trend of executives choosing family over unlimited career advancement. The most common question I get, Beckett told the Forbes journalist, is whether I regret giving up my position as CEO of a billion-dollar company. And my answer is always the same. I didn't give up anything. I gained everything that actually matters. But surely there must be moments when you miss the adrenaline rush of high-stakes negotiations, the thrill of closing major deals. Beckett smiled, thinking of Celeste's delighted laughter when he pushed her on the swing that morning, of Oliver's tiny hand wrapped around his finger during the previous night's feeding, of Violette's sleepy smile when he brought her coffee in bed. There's no adrenaline rush that compares to your 3-year-old daughter running to the door when you come home from work, he said. There's no deal that's more satisfying than successfully getting both children to sleep at the same time. And there's no negotiation more important than figuring out what your family needs and how to provide it. By 6 o'clock, Beckett was back home, where he found Violette in the backyard, pushing Celeste on the swing while Oliver napped in his stroller nearby. The autumn air was crisp and golden, and the sound of his daughter's laughter carried across the small garden. How was your day? Violette asked as he approached, accepting his kiss on the cheek while maintaining her rhythm pushing the swing. Productive, Beckett replied, settling onto the bench nearby. The Johnson plant is implementing flexible hours for all their employees, and the Forbes interview went well. They want to feature the story in their next issue about the changing definition of success in corporate America. And how do you think you'll be portrayed? Beckett watched Celeste pump her legs enthusiastically, trying to make the swing go higher, probably as either a cautionary tale or an inspiration, depending on the reader's perspective. Some people will think I'm crazy for walking away from Valiant Industries. Others might see it as proof that you can choose happiness over conventional success. Which do you think you are? I think I'm a man who finally learned what was important, Beckett said simply. And I think I'm incredibly lucky that I figured it out before it was too late. As the sun began to set, they gathered their small family and headed inside for dinner, bath time, and the nightly routine that had become sacred to Beckett. After Celeste was tucked into bed with her Dragon Princess book and Oliver was settled in his crib, Beckett and Violette found themselves alone together on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine in the comfortable silence of two people who had built something beautiful together.
"Any regrets?" Violette asked, the same question she had posed on their wedding night 3 years ago. Beckett considered the question seriously, as he always did. His former colleagues were still climbing corporate ladders, acquiring companies and accumulating wealth. His name rarely appeared in business magazines anymore except as a curiosity, the CEO who had walked away from everything for love.
But as he looked around their modest living room with its family photos and children's toys and the warm glow of contentment that permeated every corner, he felt nothing but gratitude for the choices that had brought him here. "My only regret," he said, pulling Violette closer against his side, "is that I wasted so many years thinking that success was something you could measure in dollars instead of moments. I regret not finding you sooner. I regret missing the first month of Celeste's life, but I don't regret a single day since I chose to put family first. Even when Oliver keeps us up all night, even when Celeste has a meltdown in the grocery store, even when the house is chaos and the laundry never gets done and we're too exhausted for romance." Beckett laughed, remembering the previous week's particularly challenging day when Oliver had been teething, Celeste had painted the kitchen wall with yogurt, and he had somehow ended up wearing more of the baby's dinner than Oliver had actually eaten. "Especially then," he said firmly, "because those are the moments when love isn't easy or romantic or Instagram perfect. Those are the moments when you choose to stay and help and be present even when it's hard. Those are the moments that actually matter." Violette smiled and settled more comfortably against his chest. "I love you, Beckett Valiant. The man you've become, the father you are, the husband who chooses us every single day. Forever," Beckett replied, the same promise he had made at their wedding. "Every day, for the rest of our lives, I choose you and our children, and this beautiful chaos we've built together." As they sat in the quiet contentment of their living room, Oliver sleeping peacefully upstairs, and Celeste dreaming of dragon princesses, Beckett reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had started as a man who believed that love was a luxury he couldn't afford, that success meant accumulation and achievement, and the respect of strangers. But love had taught him that real success was measured in entirely different terms. It was measured in the trust of a child who knew her father would always keep his promises. It was measured in the smile of a wife who had forgiven him for his mistakes and chosen to build a future together. It was measured in the peace that came from knowing that he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The billionaire who had once controlled a corporate empire now spent his days helping other people learn what he had discovered almost too late, that choosing love over everything else wasn't a sacrifice. It was the smartest investment he had ever made. Would you have made the same choices Beckett did, walking away from billions to build a family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts about love, family, and the true meaning of success. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.